See, folks are streaming into the event. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ashley Blue, and I'll be serving as your host today. We'll be talking about remote activism, harnessing progressive power from afar. If you've read our event summary, you'll know that we'll be talking about how to harness the energy in extreme blue states like California and New York, and how we can impact elections in red or purple states, but also know that we created this panel before the world of COVID. So we will frame these questions appropriately, and this conversation is even more relevant now than we could have ever expected. So we're excited to dig into some of the ways that we've been learning to be more active this year, and how we can be helpful. So we are going to do a quick around the horn with all of our hosts giving introductions. We've got 4 awesome panelists who are prepared to introduce themselves and talk about everything we can do to win big in 2020. So we'll start off with LaLa, and then we'll go around the horn.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is LaLa Wu, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Sister District Project, which is a national grassroots organization that was started up in the wake of the 2016 election, a story I think you'll hear about the other organizations here as well today. And what we do is we focus exclusively on providing field and fundraising support to state legislative races that are critical, because if you care about gerrymandering, it's the state legislatures in most states that control redistricting. So we're focusing this year on states where the state legislature controls redistricting. We think that it's the biggest bang for your political buck, and we have a lot of fun doing it. So really, really excited to be here and talk to you all about different strategies and tactics for how to organize remotely and make a difference in this critical existential election year.
Thanks, LaLa.
Hi all, my name is Rubia Naya, she, her, hers. I'm the head of product at Swing Left. At Swing Left for the past year and a half, before that working in the private sector on consumer and social apps. So this is my first experience working in the political space, bringing a fresh perspective to developing products that meet people where they're at. And just a little bit about Swing Left, our mission is to give grassroots volunteers and donors the most high impact actions that they can take for the most important elections. So we're focused on 12 super states, and we're unique in the way that we're solely focused on the volunteer experience versus running voter contact programs or paid media programs ourselves. So we serve as a funnel to connect grassroots volunteers with actions that matter most near them that affect our 12 super states.
Thanks, Ruby. Scott.
Thank you, Ashley, and thanks everybody for being here, and to my fellow panelists. I am Scott Forman. I'm the founder and executive director of Vote Forward. Vote Forward is a 501c4 nonprofit, and we build tools to empower volunteers all over the country and the world, actually, at this point, to our bread and butter program is that we send handwritten letters that we've shown in a few different experimental contexts to be pretty effective at boosting voter turnout. And so we are running a giant campaign to try to mobilize an army of volunteers to send 10 million of these things in mid to late October. That program we're calling the Big Send. Yeah, that's what we do.
Sweet, and Maddie.
Hey everyone, Maddie here, calling from Hyattsville, Maryland. I am the Chief of Staff and National Political Director at Indivisible. I've been with the team for more than 3 years, so basically since the beginning, and we are an organization, a social change organization that supports 4,000 indivisible groups across the country in every state, and even in Puerto Rico. We're really proud to support the activism of volunteer local leaders across the country who got in this fight after Donald Trump was elected. Like LaLa mentioned, many of our communities got in this fight after the Trump election. And so this election in November is really foundational to our identity. It's foundational to how we really get our democracy back on track. And so I'm really honored to be here with all of y'all, and always really honored to be in community with other organizers.
Awesome. So y'all, this is going to be a great conversation. A bit about me. Again, I'm Ashley Blue. I serve as political director over at Swing Left. And one of the cool things that I've found working at Swing Left is being on the other side of their support. In 2018, I worked on a Swing Left supported race where we won our primary and we got a ton of resources as soon as we won, and we ran really hard towards the finish line, and we wouldn't have been able to be as competitive as we were without Swing Left resources. This year is very different. We won't be able to receive Swing Left resources on the ground in person, but we'll be able to share those resources virtually. And so that kind of pushes us into our topic today, remote activism, and how can we harness our power. Again, we've got some crazy circumstances this year, and we've all had to be creative about how are we going to be active in this election cycle, because the election date has not changed. So we're going to run through a series of questions that'll give us some perspective on things that we can do. For folks with questions, please, if you could hold those towards the end and then drop them in the chat, we'll leave some space to answer those in the last 10 minutes, so right around 12:40-ish. If you're new and you're just popping into our Zoom room, please drop your name and your location in the chat so we know where you're on the map, and let us know which orgs you're with as well so we can build some alliances. So from there, we'll go ahead and get started. So this first question is for all of our panelists here. This year has been wildly unpredictable. We've got a pandemic, we've got racial unrest, and we've got an insane Cheeto puff that's sitting on Pennsylvania Avenue. So with that bucket of obstacles, let's talk about the basics. What and how are volunteers feeling right now with our workload in 2020? What have you learned about volunteers in the past few months and what we're up against? So I'll kick that question first to LaLa.
Absolutely. Ashley, you're so right that this year has been so unpredictable with so many huge changes we never could have anticipated. But I think what we're seeing from our volunteers is an incredible amount of resilience and energy and creativity. And, you know, those characteristics were already there among our community in the almost 4 years now that we've been around. But I think that the unpredictability and the changes this year have really tested that. And I'm so proud of our volunteers and our community for shining through, you know, for not losing hope and getting frustrated and, you know, getting discouraged because they have to change the way they do things. We had come into this year thinking, okay, we've done this 3 times now, supported state legislative elections by organizing fundraisers at house parties and then also phone bank parties and texting and postcards. Okay, we know how to do this. We've got this as we go into 2020. And then of course we had to change all of that. And so we pivoted, moved everything quickly to virtual. And I know that everybody on this call is going to have a lot of different wisdom to share from that. And I know that we really valued learning from the other groups on this call as well. So that was really great. I think that all of us were really well positioned for this moment. Us in particular, we had been doing remote activism for the 3 years previous already because our races, the races that we support, are frequently not in the same geographic area, oftentimes across the country from the people who are supporting them. And so we've always been really, really heavy on the phone banking, which has come in handy because we've already spent a lot of time convincing people the importance of phone banking, why it is absolutely, without question, the number 2 tactic behind canvassing. And so, you know, of course, being at the doors and being able to talk to voters is the best. And that's what Swing Left did so well in the midterms in 2018. But now that we can't do as much of that, hopefully we will be able to do some of it, but still remains to be seen. But now, you know, phone banking is really, really, really critical. And we are able to, you know, we're making thousands and thousands of phone calls. We've already made over 120,000. We're going to make well over 250,000, probably well over that this year. And we are really psyched to still be able to talk to voters. I think one thing that's really interesting is that the contact rate has been exceptionally high. And so people are at home, they want to talk to you. And so it's not as scary as you might think. It's really, really fun for any volunteers out there who are on the fence.
Yeah, I'm hearing that as well. Marty, what about the volunteers over at Indivisible? Are they feeling a lot of the same things?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with LaLa. I think folks continue to be fired up, and sort of the unification, the energy we saw. We launched our general election program last month, and we've increasingly seen that folks are working together to hit our direct voter contact goals. Another thing that's been really fun to watch too is the amount of collaboration and, to borrow the word sisterhood, that happens between some of our groups, either in red areas to blue areas, or in more dense areas to rural areas, in terms of offering resources and capacity. So currently, our national goal is to have 20 million direct voter contact attempts, and we're on our way to already making 4.4 million, to give you a sense of how folks are working together. And I also agree with LaLa in that, because we came of age through a Google Doc, another thing that's in our DNA is very much, yes, having organizing on the ground that took to the streets when the ACA was being threatened, when Dreamers were being threatened, but also a lot of the organizing tools we have been digital first. And so our digital organizing capacity has been built out since Trump's election. And so much of our program really is peer-to-peer, it is digital, it is, dialers and texting. And these are tools that movement has refined over the last 4 years. And so I feel really grounded in that, and feel like, even though there are a lot of things we can't control, focusing on the pieces where we do have control and agency and activist power, that we continue to just be laser focused on our goals, and making sure this is a decisive all.
Yeah, I think we've all got a lane and we got to stick to it. So thanks for calling that out. Ruby, I know Swing Left did a survey just gauging where people were. Can you talk to us a bit about how volunteers were feeling?
Yeah, anxious. But one thing that we talk about at Swing Left is, how can we turn anxiety into action? And we also were asking people, what actions they were, most likely to lean into in light of coronavirus and everything. And the top thing we heard was letter writing. And so we leaned even further into that. And I think, give that as an opportunity for Scott to talk a little bit about how his community is feeling.
Thanks, Ruby. So I do agree with you that there's a palpable anxiety out there, but I think that's normal and healthy to some extent. We have a lot of work to do in the next few months, and people, I think, are very aware of that. But one of the nice things about the tactic that we deploy is that it is a way to ameliorate your own anxiety now. It's an action you can take right now. And I think that's also true of the other activities that LaLa and Maddie, you guys talked about, the phone banking, that can happen now. And so there are real concrete ways for people to channel that that sense of anxiety into, take actions that will hopefully really make a difference. We are also seeing the creativity that LaLa, you mentioned. Before the beginning of the lockdown period, we had a number of groups out there in the world who were orchestrating these pretty elaborate letter writing parties and really enjoying doing that. And I think people felt it as a real loss that they couldn't anymore once the pandemic started, but they very quickly pivoted to a different model where it's online, and some people have arranged for bundles of letters to be dropped off with no contact to be distributed out into the community to recruit more volunteers. So I think we're also seeing a massive amount of creativity out there, and then also energy. And so I'm curious what the rest of you are seeing, but we're seeing a pretty steady month-over-month growth in the activity of our volunteers on a sort of exponential curve. And it's very encouraging. I feel like we were already seeing a lot of, enthusiasm earlier in the year, and that's only growing. And I think that's a pretty good sign that people are in fact translating some of that angst into action.
Yeah, Scott, I think that kind of segues into my next question about tools pretty well. The pandemic forced us all to go inside and rethink the way that we're communicating with voters. So what tools has everyone seen that volunteers have latched onto? I know we talked about a couple of them. And so I'm going to start this one with Mari just to talk about some of the tools that you highlighted before and anything else that volunteers may have been latching onto in your space.
Sure, and I will be super honest that I am not the tools lady, so I will not know the exact vendor, but I do know that we have stood up a really, really robust digital organizing peer-to-peer program that's been running since July and is, I don't want to say overwhelmed because I don't know if that's the right like energy vibe in the word, but that it has an influx of volunteer capacity. It is massively growing. We continue to see folks really interested in being part of our volunteer on-ramps. A number I hadn't shared earlier is that we've already engaged since we launched 6,500 volunteers since July through that on-ramp, and we hope to get to 30,000 just in our general election program. And again, it's texting, it's dialers. We're also able to set up, if for some reason within our general election program, we don't have a target that folks are really excited about, we also do offer some distributed support to groups who are running their own dialers. So we're trying to cover, like where are the battlegrounds, where are we trying to help, not just in the presidential, but in the Senate. We have a Payback Project campaign where we're trying to make sure we hold Republicans accountable for all of their mess and complicit ways, especially around COVID. And so it's really important for us that we're funneling some of those volunteers into some of those Senate programs as well.
Yeah, I think you called something out that I've been really concerned about as I talk to partners in the progressive space about overwhelming some of these tools. LaLa, can you talk about like sister district volunteers? Have y'all found that you're maxing out phone banks quicker or running through lists quicker? And like, what have you learned from that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there has been so much enthusiasm and which I'm hearing, from everybody on this call, which I think is really, really bodes well, for the general. And we make our endorsements pretty early. We started endorsing candidates back in March and then got our field up probably by April. And so people have been making phone calls consistently, and we now have over 30 recurring phone banks that are happening weekly or bi-weekly to be making calls for folks. And I think, and a really important component of getting people to do something is, building that habit and building that consistency in. And we've found that although that's not a tech tool exactly, that's a tactic that's been really effective at really getting people to commit and to get those dials out there. So, I think that we have stretched certain things to the limit, in terms of Zoom. Of course, everybody uses Zoom. We're here using it right now. And although Zoom was certainly not designed to hold virtual phone banks, it's worked out very, very well. And people are able to log on, and I'm sure you all are doing something similar, but people are able to log on, get the training at the top, and then you all turn off your sound or you mute everybody else. And so you can still be there making phone calls, with community. And if you have any questions, there's staffers or volunteer leaders usually on board who you can then reach out to and ask. So it's, that kind of thing. It's been really awesome to see Zoom be used in this way. And I think that we'll just continue to see hopefully improvements in the tool and, continued innovations in the way that volunteers are thinking about it. And, I think that Scott was mentioning the creative the creative, letter writing parties that people were throwing. And I think what's really been amazing is that there's so many creative ways to do so many different events. And you can bring almost all of it onto Zoom. There's a few things that don't translate, but a lot of things that we were doing before do. So comedy nights and candidate meet and greets and cocktail making parties, yoga classes. There's all kinds of things that can translate and help people have fun while really engaging. And we've seen such tremendous success. We've actually raised our fundraising goal twice already this year. We're already at $840,000, thanks, straight to candidates, which it makes a huge difference in these small, under-spotlighted state legislative races. And we're quite confident we're gonna clear $1 million this year to candidates. So that's all through the creativity and the resilience and the hard work of our volunteers. Another really cool tool we've seen is silent auctions. I think that that's been a really amazing way also to not only raise money, get people involved, but also highlight local businesses, local artists, and show off their work. So lots of really great stuff, a combination of, new thinking as well as new tools.
Yeah, I think all of those cool new things are so exciting. Like all of our candidates were in the house those first 2 weeks. Like, what are we gonna do? And then they let the Zoom rip. So we're in a great place with making technology work for us in this moment. I'm gonna roll into my next question. That's talking about the dynamics of the year. Hopefully this year has made us more thoughtful about how we're talking to each other. There's been pandemics, and in the pandemic, you don't know what other people are going through. You have no clue. And so I think we've all had to learn how to give each other grace in this moment. And then on top of the protests that have been going on and all of our work to be anti-racist in the progressive movement, we've all had to think about the words that we're sharing to each other. And that's within our workspaces, that's with partners, and that's on the phone with voters. So this question is talking about how our volunteers should communicate. What should volunteers in less competitive states remember when reaching out to voters across the country? And I'm going to start with Scott, just because I know the Vote For tool has so many letters in a lot of these states, and we've got a lot of help across the country pouring in to targeted states. So what should volunteers keep in mind when they're talking to voters across the country?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. That's a great question. There's an aspect of being cautious about what you say and how you say it that I think predates the pandemic also, that I think we have continued to emphasize in our instructions to our volunteers. And the main thing we say is that we ask people not to make too many assumptions about the perspective of the person that they're writing to. So that is in some ways built into the structure of our program. So the letters that we ask people to send have a template, very carefully written template, that appeals to some really universal values around civic participation and belonging to a democracy. And then, but there is also space for people to write something personal. And so the guidance that we give is that we ask our volunteers to indeed make it personal. So the more heartfelt and the more it is about you and why participating in our democracy is important to you, the better. And so, by putting some guardrails around the communications that we ask our volunteers to send, I think we help mitigate some of the risks of people being insensitive. And then also in the instructions, we ask people to really focus on their own experiences and what they would like to share. And so, it kind of goes both ways. It's like we're transmitting something to the recipient, but trying not to, say, you should do this or vote for this person or not for this person. It's all about trying to share something about the personal experience of the sender. And so, yeah, that's how we approach it. I'm trying to think if there's anything I want to add to that. We do say, so just for the record, Vote Forward letters are entirely about mobilization and not about persuasion. So what we're doing is really just trying to get people to show up at the polls at all. And that's why we start with this kind of universal message and put the guardrails around it, where we say, don't make too many assumptions about the policy preferences or the backgrounds and opinions of the person that you might be writing to.
Yeah, I'm wondering for Ruby, like, does this factor into tech at all? Like when you're creating technology, how to communicate with volunteers and how we should be talking to voters as well?
Yeah, I think, listening. So like I said, we do a lot of surveys and, asking people, how they're feeling and what resonates with them, and incorporating that feedback into how we develop our products. And I think another layer that I add on to this is just like educate, like, and constantly challenge your own assumptions, and, never speak for other people, only speak for yourself. I'm also thinking a lot about how, in terms of our tech offerings for trainings, are we offering multiple types of trainings? People learn differently. So as we're helping people to communicate effectively, are we also communicating effectively with them to help them, continue on with the volunteer experience?
LaLa, y'all are in districts all over the country. How do you prep your volunteers to talk to folks in deep red pockets and they live in very safe blue communities?
Yeah, it's absolutely a great question. And my answer has some parallels to Scott's. And I think first and foremost, authenticity is incredibly important. And just, hanging down to that idea of what is it that I'm doing here? Why am I taking time out of my busy life to volunteer, to try to talk to a voter, to write a postcard, et cetera? And I think that is really important. And again, for us, we also have structural elements of our program that mean that, you're not in uncomfortable conversations very often. So for example, first, we only work with candidates who want to work with us and, they understand our model and where our volunteer base is. And then in addition to that, we are on the hard side. So we work closely with the campaigns. And so we actually don't develop our own messaging. We don't cut our own lists. We follow the lead of the campaigns. And so we trust them to have the on the ground experience and that local knowledge to know what message will resonate with their constituencies. And then we're just the messengers. We show up and say, we'll be your hands, we'll help you deliver that message. And on the rare occasion that somebody picks up the phone on the other end and asks where a volunteer is from, of course, we tell the volunteer, tell the truth, say where you're from. And on the rare occasion that does happen, and a volunteer gives that answer, people are delighted. The voter on the other end is so amazed and excited that somebody from Illinois, somebody from California, somebody from Washington State cares about their election. So, we saw the same thing on the doors in the before times when we were allowed to do that. And it's really incredible, to see these connections and to really realize that we're all in each other's backyards. We all have to take care of each other. And that this is not, we can't stay in our silos. That's part of the problem that's led us to where we are today. And then just one other piece is that, a big part of our political goals, the outcomes we want to see, is to flip strategic state legislatures where the state legislature controls redistricting so that we can redraw district lines. And it's not just of state district lines, it's also of congressional district lines, right? And how many people we're able to bring to Congress from a certain state, that affects the majority for all of us Democrats, all of us progressives. And so that's just one of the many, many ways that we're all connected.
Absolutely. I am from North Carolina, where we gerrymander for fun. So your work is necessary and needed. Kind of segues into the next question pretty smoothly. And this one's for Mari. Talking about swing states, building power, making sure that we're communicating across the country effectively. We know Indivisible highlights a focus on building power in rural areas and red states. How has remote activism affected that plan this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I want to give a big shout out to our organizer, Afton, who leads a lot of our rural organizing work. She does incredible rural organizing. She, along with other partners in this rural network of folks who roll and squad really deep, organized this beautiful virtual convening this year. Just a couple months ago, it was supposed to be in person. They quickly switched it to a virtual gathering. They had thousands of people up there where they were both engaging in song and community and also talking about how they were going to build their plans in this moment. And so I do think a theme that I think I've heard throughout our session today is the creativity of people when we are met with a new reality. And so I would say that our rural organizers kind of have to grapple with some of those creative realities more frequent than not. And so our folks have had a pretty sizable organizing footprint in rural country for a while. I wish I could have brought, we have this video of different indivisible organizers in rural areas who each did a shout out, and we did this really beautiful reel of them just calling in from like really, you know, I thought I was from rural Nevada until I saw this video and I was like, I am not from rural Nevada. Like these folks are from rural country. And so I would say one, like the continued prioritization of bringing these rural activists into community together has been a really important part of how we support activists in the rural areas. The also creating not just community to fellowship, but community to, again, scale and grow capacity. So where we have groups, for example, we have groups in Santa Cruz who are really eager to move resources for a billboard in Eastern Kentucky, where groups there were inviting that kind of support and inviting that kind of helping out of their resources. We also have groups who have worked together. Indivisible Greene County in Tennessee ran a vote by mail awareness campaign ahead of the August primary to debunk some of the local myths that were just circling their town, and no one was really pushing back on it. So it's very like surgical examples of that in some of these communities where you don't have a lot of other folks pushing back. And so that's the other piece. But I start with community because one of the things I heard when I first met a lot of indivisible organizers and leaders was sort of that like coming out and looking out their door and realizing there's other people who wanted to throw down with them. And in some ways, like that rolling and squatting together meant they were more powerful and less afraid and more courageous in their activism. Especially in places where probably progressivism or issues, you know, however folks define their proximity to our issues, but that they weren't really, no one was talking about them, no one was defending them in that way. And so I think that's the other really kind of cornerstone piece of our rural organizing that we're seeing, is just making sure that folks feel really rooted in their community and fellowship around the issues we're fighting.
That's super helpful to understand, like knowing that your neighbor might not be on the other side is so comforting. The next question's for LaLa. It's kind of building on this same moment, but this is talking about obstacles that candidates may have faced. We know that Sister District focuses heavily on state legislative races. What obstacles have your candidates overcome in the last few months, and what can others do to support them remotely?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I mean, the pandemic has affected every single aspect of our lives, and it's been so impactful for state legislative candidates in particular, which we focus on exclusively. So we certainly know a lot about them and what they need. And, you know, it's always hard to get your name out as a state legislative candidate. You are very, very far down ballot, especially in a presidential election year, especially in one that is as loud as this year. And, you know, we already thought it was going to be challenging. Coming in, we knew that everybody was going to be talking about the 2020 election. And we were already like, okay, we've got to get ready to really support and like put everything we've got behind these state leg candidates. Of course, then the pandemic happened and the racial justice protests happened. And, you know, it started to get even harder. So is anybody paying attention to what's going on at the state ledge level? I think what's been really helpful is that there is a growing understanding of how important these state legislators are. You know, this pandemic, for example, is going to have a long tail of recovery. And, you know, in the absence of some federal legislation, some sort of overarching strategy, which is not yet forthcoming and won't be for some time, we're really going to need strong state legislatures who are progressive and who care about the people they represent to help bring us out of this economic and public health catastrophe. And then on racial justice, you know, of course, again, we would love to see someday soon, hopefully, some kind of federal overarching legislation. But short of that, and even when that does come, we know that so much change is going to have to happen on the state legislative level. That's where a lot of the real work is going to get done. And not only at the state level, but at the local level as well. And I think that there is a growing understanding that that is the case, which is helping to boost the profile of many of these legislators. But you know, it's harder to raise money, it's harder to get their word out, it's harder to meet constituents because they can't go to community events, they can't knock on doors. And so that's where, groups like ours come in, and we can help them with fundraising. As I said, we're gonna raise well over $1 million for our 36 candidates this year, 40 candidates this year, maybe, close to that number. And we're announcing a few more in September. And then also on the phone banking piece, we're really excited about all the progress that we are making there. And then again, I said this at the top, but I think it bears repeating that we're kind of phone banking evangelists around here. It's such an amazing way to be able to connect with voters, and you can do it remotely. Again, people are picking up their phones, so contact rates are higher. People are really excited to talk. And the latest Analyst Institute, numbers show that warm texting, it may have a slight edge over phone banking, but phone banking is still better than regular texting. Not to say we shouldn't do it all. We do need to do it all. This is 2020, we have to do it all. But it's just, important little things to keep in mind as we choose how to spend our time. So we're really excited about all those pieces and the different ways that there are to help these state legislative candidates.
Yeah, I think I'm really glad that you called out the obstacles that candidates are facing with trying to host more fundraisers online, and how do you make that enticing to folks. And I think the other level to that we all have to keep in mind now is Zoom security, like making sure that trackers aren't showing up in your event and blowing it up. So those are new things that we have learned in this moment to protect our candidates. And I think, if nothing, this year has shown us how important local leadership is. They will literally protect you when it comes down to it. So thank you for your work at Sister District. Next question is for Scott. Scott, Vote Forward seems like it was built for this moment. Like, you could not have had better timing to mobilize people from the crib to write letters. So can you talk to us about the journey of making Vote Forward, how it came to fill this role that it does now, and what do you envision it being in the future now that you are meeting needs currently? Where do you see Vote Forward going?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ashley. So, I mean, it wasn't built for this moment. I would say if the question is how did it come to be what it looks like now, a lot of it stems from my own fear of calling people on the phone and knocking on people's doors. So I promise I have since gotten over that, and I am a happy phone banker now. But the structure of it was largely motivated by sort of my own introversion and desire to have something that I could do that felt genuine and gave me some space to say what I wanted to say, but without, having to cross that particular, boundary of anxiety. So when we first started, we kind of thought of it as voter contact for introverts. And I think that's still a big part of the appeal. And just, it's a happy accident that it turns out that in this moment, physical contact is actually impossible. And so it's really nice that not just us, but all these other tools, the phone banking expertise and technology that people have built, that all of that exists and is out there ready for us to deploy it. Where is it going? It's really hard to think all that far past November, to be honest. The one thing that we feel quite confident about is that we're dedicated to doing things that we have confidence work. So we're proud members of the Analyst Institute. We kind of contribute and read as much as we can about what other people are doing. And so, the goal for us is to provide really easy access to whatever we think are the most effective tactics. And we think that letter writing is quite effective, but we know that other things are too. And so we're, thinking about whether we have a particular angle that we can provide on providing easy on-ramps into the other kinds of tactics that are particularly effective. So we may branch out into encouraging other kinds of things like phone banking and texting in the future.
An all access one-stop shop, Scott. Wow, powerful.
We don't want to recreate things that other people have done well though either. So we may turn out to be a hub of some sort, or if we can find a unique angle that we think other people aren't already filling, we might try to contribute in those spaces. But we want to support everybody else who's doing great work in those areas too. 2024
already looking up for us. Beautiful. Next question is for Ruby. This one's talking some more about tech. Technology has been our sole source of redemption. What would we do without the internet in this moment? So can you talk a bit about how Swing Left has been harnessing tech to help with this election? And what will tech need to achieve in the future to serve remote activism?
Yeah, so one thing that we're constantly revisiting, reevaluating is like, are we meeting people where they're at? Are we showing them the most relevant and impactful actions that they can take? Are we also guiding them through the journey of being an impactful volunteer or donor? So our Action Finder tool has an algorithm that has many different inputs to effectively rank events and actions. And one additional layer that we are currently working on is what we call destination mode, which is essentially saying that this event that's happening, say here in New York or in the Bay Area, is impacting an election in, say, Colorado or Arizona. So that, if someone wants to specifically take action in one of our 12 super states, we can better surface those asks. And what I think tech needs is to, again, constantly reevaluate our algorithms for bias, for relevancy, and for impact. And then also ensure that we're always saving space to recognize and reward our volunteers and donors by showing them the impact of their work.
Ruby, I'm going to ask a follow-up question. Have you seen changes in virtual behavior among users and volunteers?
Yeah, I think, like we talked about earlier, people leaned a little bit more into letter writing, but I think the other big thing is training. And again, like holding people's hand essentially through the transition to virtual organizing and giving them different opportunities to engage with training, whether that's through written content or, videos or live panels such as this, as people, learn differently and but I will say that we have seen just as much, we have like excitement and readiness to take action from home.
That's really good news. We're right on time, y'all. It's 12:42 East Coast time. If you've got questions that you'd love to ask these panelists, please go ahead and start dropping those in the chat, and I'll be happy to take a peek at those and throw them up to our peeps. The next question is about trainings, and this one's from Mari and LaLa. How have trainings evolved in the remote working environment? I'll start with LaLa because I know Sister District is digging down deep into those state legislative races, and we talked a bit about candidates adjusting, volunteers are adjusting. How have the trainings been adjusted to meet those needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of parallels here in talking about training as there are in talking about the other aspects of our work. And so whereas everything we were able to do, well, there's a few things. We've always been hybrid in the sense that, we've done a lot of training from HQ National out to volunteer leaders in particular, who then go out and train their volunteers. And so this distributed organizing model is one that, is part of our infrastructure from the beginning. And so we've continued to, and it's become even more important to have monthly volunteer leader calls with our folks, give them a space to connect with each other. We put them into breakout groups, thank you Zoom, to be able to connect and share ideas. People love being able to get to know each other that way, especially because we aren't able to meet again in person anytime soon, this is really important. It's been really cool to see how we had a volunteer leader summit in DC in February, right before all of this hit. And we're so grateful that we did, because those connections, folks have been able to leverage them and continue them even, with Zoom and over Slack and over email, et cetera. So that's been a really cool part about the training that National does with our volunteer leaders. And then on the even more tactical side, our volunteer leaders need to know how to run phone banks, and then they need to train other people who know how to run phone banks and who know how to run fundraisers, et cetera. A lot of times that would have just been a kind of like informal mentorship model. You show up to an event and you learn from other people, you work together. Now, of course, we have to do that on Zoom. But what's really cool is that we don't have to ask anybody to find childcare, get dressed, sit in traffic, and then go to an event anymore. They can just show up. And not only can they show up at an event for their local team, we've got a lot of really amazing teams, but one really, really standout set of phone bankers in Portland. And so we just send a lot of our new aspiring phone bank leaders to that phone bank. And we say, check out this phone bank. It's every Sunday, show up, learn from these people. And that's an amazing way to, kind of see one, show one, do one kind of thing. So that's been a really cool tactic that Zoom and this pandemic times have encouraged.
Yeah, I think one of the things we peeped early on were that our first time candidates and their staff needed a lot more backup in this environment. And so the trainings that staffers had access to needed to be a little bit more in depth as well. Mari, what did y'all encounter on Team Indivisible as you transitioned in, or as you provided those trainings online? Like what did you have to do to make those a little bit more useful in the virtual environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I feel like I hype everything LaLa says. I'm like, yeah, us too. But I will say that very similarly, our model is also a distributed organizing model. And so for sure, like from the get, our model has a lot of space for digital organizing and digital training for our leaders, and then they go out and do the same thing. So I would echo that. We used to have, like last cycle, for example, we would have regional convenings in person. So we would have our organizing, our training, some of our other teams go out on the ground and put on these beautiful regional convenings so leaders could meet, Indivisible leaders could meet on the ground based on a regional area. Our first ever convening of national leaders was last summer as we were getting ready for the primary to really kick up. And so it was a chance both to connect, train, think about how we wanted to show up in the primary, think about our goals beyond. And that was really special for us because it was, honestly, it kind of spoke to our sort of digital first aspect of training and content in terms of national, like the national staff and partnering with Indivisible leaders. That was one of my faves because I got to meet so many more leaders from one place. Fast forward to now, I would say as soon as, in March, early March, our organizing team quickly put out a resource that was talking about how do we maintain community as organizers, as activists, as COVID started coming up. And it was like, not only was it really helpful for our folks in the Indivisible community, but I was connecting with other movement leaders who were like, what are we telling people, right? This was like late February, early March, around there, when folks were like, how are we gonna still be in community? So kind of going back again to our DNA, our like, hey, let's put a Google Doc together and like, let's just get this out to folks so they can feel some sort of like tethering to some, to something that's keeping us all connected. And it was sort of like, how do we stay in community safely? How do we still organize safely? So that's kind of like the more like communal organizing space. In terms of training for our voter contact work, for our general election work, we had our boot camp last week, I believe. Yeah, last week. And we had 2,005 people logged in. I mean, it's just like wild interest. And we had two tracks, right? We had a track for folks who were really experienced, and we had a track for folks who were new and needed to get a little bit more of the background and the coaching. And then folks would come in throughout the day, depending on what track they were on, and work through like best practices. And the more experienced track had some other like myth busting and hearing from folks who are working on election security, just so that they could get some like a deeper analysis. So I would say like that to me really informs that not only is there a real energy around like deeper training desires, but also for like folks want to be ready, they want to know what to say, they want to feel supported. Our training team, I think, felt extremely excited that we got that kind of support. And so I'm hoping that for this next weekend of action, next weekend, folks are feeling even more like jazzed for hitting the texts and calls running.
Yes, each weekend of action is going to get better and better because we have to win. We're right at time, but I do want to get to Roshan's question in the chat. I'm going to ask Ruby, has COVID enhanced or decreased the member base? Have you seen any change over at Swing Left?
So it's been still pretty consistent in terms of like conversion for our Action Finder tool. And, you know, we basically completely pivoted our offering to only virtual events. So I think that now what we're seeing is, you know, given that people can plug in from home, looking at our ranking in terms of how we incorporate distance, or how we incorporate, you know, whether something's on the weekend or not, given that people aren't traveling as much. So it's been fairly steady. I wouldn't say that it's increased because of this, but I don't see a big decrease by any means.
That's good to hear.
Actually, I think that Caitlin
Were
had,
you
Caitlin had a question in the Q&A, I think.
Ooh, I didn't see it. Can you read it, LaLa? I can't see it.
Do you have any advice for recruiting folks in our lives to get more involved? She's an avid texter and postcard writer and wants to be more effective in pulling in friends and family to join for the next 82 days. So yes, I mean, I think come to an event and you know, find an event that you like and bring them. You know, it's so much easier to bring somebody in as opposed to just asking them to show up. So say like, hey, come do this with me. Like we were gonna go for a walk or grab a distance coffee, but instead like come join me on Zoom, you know, and then we can go for that walk or whatever it is. But that's, I mean, it's good old fashioned bring a friend. I think that really is effective.
Yeah, the thing I'll say in closing to that question, use social media to your advantage. Every time you're seeing a posting that's talking about the important things in this election cycle, things people need to stay on top of, hit them DMs, tag their asses, do all of that. And go to Netroots' Twitter, follow all of us because our timelines will keep you informed. Please and thank you. So to our esteemed panelists, Scott, Ruby, LaLa, Maddie, thank you so much for joining us. It's been my pleasure to be your host. Thanks everyone at home tuning in. We appreciate you. Please stay safe. And we'll see you on the other side of this W in November. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Ashley. You were fabulous.
Thanks, Ashley. That was awesome.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.